Hello all. This is a quick video on the economic situation surrounding the coronavirus. I decided to make this video because there's a lot of people who have serious concerns as to whether or not we're doing the right thing in the crisis, and maybe we have the wrong economic system entirely for managing these sorts of problems. There are some who believe that an authoritarian command economy would solve such issues. We just had this massive Marxist communist system. Wouldn't that smooth out all these bumps much better than what we already do? On the other hand, there are people who are thinking, maybe from a social Darwinistic perspective, that market economies naturally clean the dead weight. When you have a crisis, those people who aren't well prepared for it suffer. It's their fault. They should bear the burden of that rather than everyone else. And that in a classical laissez-faire system, savings rates would be higher. People would take more careful steps to ensure the future, and they wouldn't need to be bailed out. So if you fall into the social Darwinism camp, you believe in the theory of a moral hazard. A moral hazard is caused when people expect to be bailed out, so they do bad things. So in this argument, the grasshopper versus the ant, classic Aesop's fable. The grasshopper and the ant are both supposed to prepare for winter. The ant works really hard through all the good times. The grasshopper is out there playing around and having a bunch of fun. And when the winter comes, the ant is well prepared and the grasshopper isn't. And the moral of the story is supposed to be that you're supposed to do your own preparations during good times in case of bad times. And so the moral hazard argument basically says that if you let the economy run and you don't intervene, people will learn their lessons and they will learn how to prepare for the future. And that if you constantly give people bailouts for every single mistake they make, they're getting rewarded for making their mistakes. They're never going to learn. And there is some truth to this. You can observe this phenomena on playgrounds where the teacher always intervenes. Students never learn how to work things out for themselves. Companies that get bailed out frequently tend to do a very poor job of preparing for the future. So there's definitely evidence for these sorts of moral hazards. So I'm definitely not going to be making any argument that moral hazards don't exist. On the other extreme, there are folks who think that the best way to prevent the moral hazard in the first place is to make it impossible for the bad behavior. To punish people immediately and harshly for any bad behavior, and then reward the whole rest of the society all the time. So everybody gets rewards, and only the person who has the bad behavior gets punished. They get punished severely, but everybody else is protected from the bad behavior. So let's say, for example, you're in a command economy, and you give out quotas, rations to everybody all the time. And then there's a crisis. Let's say the rations or the quotas need to be adjusted very quickly. In this sort of system, the argument is nobody is really wrong, nobody's at fault. It's some act of God that creates the crisis, and that the authoritarian system is well suited to manage such things, because there is no harm, no foul. nobody's to blame. The authoritarian system then acts quickly to force people to behave appropriately, and then anyone who doesn't follow the rules is severely punished. So that's sort of like folks in the street saying, we would do better if we had a much harsher authoritarian, almost Chinese system that threatened the hell out of anybody who dared to not move with the social norms, like to wear masks or something. And so the argument here is that the United States is neither. Okay, the United States is neither a laissez-faire system where nothing happens. So there's no auto-correction mechanism. It's not social Darwinistic, so there are moral hazards in the United States. The market doesn't self-correct. We have a Keynesian intervention. We throw $2 trillion bailout packages in there. So we're certainly not following the moral hazard theory. Well, the dyed-in-the-wool Republicans would like us to go to the moral hazard approach and force everybody to bear their own costs. Right? Now, on the other extreme, we're certainly not an authoritarian system that reacts, in this massive coordinated response, forcing people to comply, and using quota systems. No, we don't do that either. So some people might look at our system and say, you know what? If either one of those two things might work better, we must be in a worse place. So the idea is that if you're on the right wing, you would say, we could only improve if we move closer to laissez-faire. If you're on the left, you would say we could only improve if we move closer to authoritarian. In other words, you're getting a vote of no confidence from both sides. And this is basically what's been going on for, let me be honest here, the entire modern era, over 100 years. Since at least 1906, when we first put in income tax. During the entire modern era, the right wing says, we can't possibly be efficient. We're not choosing the laissez-faire, moral hazard, natural market forces approach. So we're at a suboptimal place. If we go farther to the right, things should be better. And the authoritarians are saying if we go way far to the left, we could definitely act better. And there are examples of countries who have been in growth periods in history that outperformed the current United States. And these are countries that were one of either extreme. For example, the early United States, before 1906, was one of these moral hazard societies. A lot of freedom, most people bearing their own risks, very little government intervention. And under that system, we grew faster than we did now. But then you can also look into China and say, well, under a more authoritarian market approach, they grew twice as fast or more than we did. And you could just look at those numbers and say, well, it seems as if they're both right. Either or might be better than where we are. Either or. Okay? So this is really interesting because it helps to expose why both sides think they're right. They both think that if we were to have a more pure system of one or the other type, then we would increase our performance. So that's why you have, for decades, this constant argument from both sides that, well, clearly the only thing that would improve us is to move the direction that we want to go. However, there's a major, major flaw in this thinking. The major flaw is the assumption that the country that we are today could implement either of those two strategies better than the current strategy it's already implemented. In other words, there is evidence that the appropriate economic strategy for a country is specific to its level of development, its overall system design, its goals, and its priorities. It's relative to what it is that you're trying to achieve at a particular place and time in history. So, for example, if you look at the United States in the 1800s, it had a resource situation that is incredibly rare. It had nearly unlimited natural resources for that century. Unlimited land, unlimited mining, unlimited foresting, unlimited farming. And when you have what we call that munificence, it's a munificent environment. That means it's just abundant. And what we found out is that if you have a unusually abundant ecological system that is unspoiled or has barely been tapped, if you take your hands off, you can have incredible growth with very little downside. You can even go through repeated small crises and still be on an upward trajectory. For example, throughout the 1800s, there was repeated bank failures, but even during those bank failures, the overall economy was growing by leaps and bounds. So in other words, the bank system itself wasn't even that important relative to the normal historical situations. You had a situation where a tremendous number of immigrants were able to start businesses without borrowing. You had a tremendous number of companies that operated with so little debt that even when the banks did collapse, the companies didn't collapse because they weren't overextended on debt. So when you have this situation, a libertarian governance approach to the market makes total sense. On the other hand, look at China. This is a situation where this country was founded with one of the most abundant sets of resources imaginable. That was several thousand years ago. And after several thousand years of being the most productive society on Earth and with the most population density on Earth, it's kind of running out of resource advantages. There's really no frontiers left in China except for innovation. So now the Chinese have the opposite of a munificent environment. They have what you would basically call a contracting ecological landscape. It's getting worse every year. They were past their prime before 1900 in resources, past their prime. There are certain resources where there's still the taps are flowing because they were very recent, like rare earth metals and stuff like that. But in general, the Chinese environment is a situation with natural demographic constrictions. It's harder and harder to make it every year as long as the population is growing. And so under such a system, authoritarian rule tends to work because when you need to set quotas, when the international markets are willing to pay the Chinese to export everything they got, you got a situation where the government might want to step in and say, we can't afford that, even though the markets are willing to pay for it. We've got to manage these resources efficiently. So as you're going down the decline curve, it's obvious that some quota type relationships are necessary. And furthermore, if you are the number one country in the world in terms of the demographic crunch, number two being India, then you've got a special economic crisis of your own that's chronic, not acute. And so you're going to have to do special things to deal with that. Furthermore, keep in mind that China was at a much lower production level than the United States until recently. And so it had vast amounts of peasant folks who were doing terribly in the economy. And China basically had a very, could quickly develop to catch up to the US level over a 50-year period. So it could have double-digit growth. And so it's not even so much whether or not the system is authoritarian or not that creates that fast growth. It's whether or not the system fits the ecology, the overall environmental conditions around that economy. Not just the resource bases, but the demographics, the geopolitics, the military situation, and also the more powerful a military power is, the faster it's going to grow. Ceteris paribus. If you're one of those military hegemons, then you tend to negotiate all the best deals. Everything tends to be a little more efficient for you. And you can print money just for being big. It's an economy of scale thing. Just for being big, China can have faster growth than a small country over a long period of time. But anyway, Chinese growth using authoritarianism has a certain set of special conditions that makes it work so well. But you'll find that Chinese neighbors that are authoritarian do worse, and that Chinese neighbors with liberal economies actually developed faster. Japan developed much faster. It's a much more liberal economy, even though it does have some command features. Same thing with South Korea and Taiwan and Singapore. So if you do an open comparison of all the liberal type economies versus all the authoritarian type economies, you'll see that in general, on the world as a whole, the liberal economies kick the butts of the authoritarian economies. It takes a very special set of conditions for the authoritarians to do well. Secondly, you'll notice that the more that China liberalizes its market system, the faster it grows. And that was true over the entire run of the period I'm talking about. So as the Chinese started to embrace markets, their performance went up. And that's just obvious. Now, it is true that the Chinese have more meddling and command in their political system. Where do people live? What are people allowed to do? How do they work? Where do they go? All that sort of individual stuff is far more authoritarian in China. But their actual productive economy is now nearly as liberal, not quite, mind you, as the United States. It's just that the individuals have very little authority, and that they are subjugated to the national policies and the goals set out by the Chinese 5-year plan. So they have to innovate towards the government goals set by China. Well, where did they learn how to do that? Us. That's right. In the 1930s, in the 1940s, there was a guy named Vannevar Bush in the United States. And he was the dean of the MIT and one of the founders of Raytheon and one of the smartest men on the planet. And he was considered to be one of the people on Earth who understood how the whole global economy works. One of the people on Earth who understood the entire research base that drove business and technology and how the whole system worked, where it starts with basic research and then applied research and then early stage innovation and late stage innovation and radical and incremental innovation. He's the one who figured that all out and how to orchestrate that on a national level. And he ran our wartime economy. He was the #1 U.S. citizen in charge of the wartime economy of the 1940s, Vannevar Bush. Okay? And he believed that he could do better than our fascist opponents and our communist opponents using a coordinated system that was more market-based than not, that was very centrist in terms of its left-right perspective. In terms of the world politics of the times, it was no longer a laissez-faire system. It was a coordinated national system. But it afforded people more political freedoms than China did, and far more than Russia and Germany, Nazi Germany, and so forth. What it did is it basically said, we need to coordinate something, but that something is not going to be the market, and that something is not going to be the political freedoms of the individual. So what was he coordinating? The innovation system. He called it a national innovation system. And as it turns out, we went from an unprepared country in 1939, recovering from a Great Depression, with very little national coordination, low tax rates. Even after we incorporated some of the high tax rates to put in the public works projects and so forth, we were really, the FDR system was not really working. It was just plugging holes in problems. It was sort of crisis management, kind of like what we're trying to do today. Just let's just plug holes in the crisis, or fill the holes in the dikes. Right? But what Vannevar Bush did is he did something far more insightful than that. He said, you know what? Not all projects have the same return on investment. The Public Works Administration said, well, pay people to beautify curbs, pay people to, work in the park system, pay people to make lots of nice little urban projects and so forth. But these things, these beautification projects, have very low return on investment. Certainly, we are still benefiting from some of the work they did, but it didn't create a compound growth engine. So after the money was spent, there was very little multiplier for the economy. There was very little return on investment. What Vannevar Bush figured out is that you need to start top, go down of the innovation chain and look for the highest return on investment projects and focus your energy on big deals, really big stuff, big infrastructure, big things that create an economic multiplier for every other industry, such as the highway system. That was one of those things that the United States did in the late 40s and through the 50s. This is basically Eisenhower Republican period. The idea that tax rates were really high and probably much higher than they should have been. But that was really a way to say we don't really want people to be paid in wages for those things. We would rather people be paid in equity. And so there was lots of ways around a 90% tax rate. You just basically say, you know what, we will hire a lot more people at a 50% tax rate rather than one person at 90. But anyway, the tax rates were in many ways a problem rather than a solution. The spending ideas of the 1950s were correct, though. And so what we did is we created a national innovation system approach that was neither far left nor far right. And more to the point, this innovation system would try to create a complex set of organizations that are interlinked and interrelated, non-governmental organizations like the Model United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF. Those were all recent creations. The oversight organizations such as the Environmental Protection Agency, the FDA, those kinds of things, the FCC, FTC. These are the kinds of things that were really popular. Now, some of that started earlier, but it really was all part of the same push towards a national innovation system. And the idea was that each one of these different organizations would have its own missions and goals, and that would be more resilient than a centrally planned system. So what you have is a bunch of, expert organizations, each one that's specifically designed to focus around one set of problems. So several hundred different organizations. And each one of them comes up with a plan. And then they make recommendations. And then those are aggregated. And those make recommendations. And those are aggregated. And then that ends up all in the planning desks of the upper brass. In Congress, and the president gets to read the Brookings Institute reports and the military reports and so forth. And everybody gets the right information that they need because of lateral connections between these various organizations. So and there would be at least two, if not three, organizations that have oversight over similar issues. For example, the NSA, CIA, and the FBI had overlapping jurisdictions, as well as ATF and the marshals. And so if you look at it, there was a number of organizations set up that had overlapping, although not identical, oversight. And again, that was on purpose. It was to try to make sure that things didn't go out of control, corruption and bad planning and so forth. So the point is, the United States is already built with a centrist national innovation system approach, heavily influenced by people like Teddy Roosevelt, Vannevar Bush, and Eisenhower, and folks like that. And that's because we operate on a third principle. Instead of using the open market or an authoritarian system, we use what we call a national innovation system to try to make sure that all of the U.S.'s strategic interests are met through a quasi-centralized, quasi-decentralized, highly robust, highly flexible system with lots of checks and balances and buffers and financial flexibility, so that when things need to come together quickly, it's a little bit slower than an authoritarian system, but there's second and third opinions that make sure we don't overreach in one opinion direction in some radical way. We have at least several different highly informed opinions from trusted experts. So that's kind of how our national innovation system is set up. Now, here's the problem. In the current day and age, the media has been talking down our national innovation system. They've been pretending as if it doesn't exist. They've been pretending as if we are in a total mess. And the United States is just horribly organized. And it's just the worst run country on earth. And the left wing says we're not nearly authoritarian enough. We don't look enough like China. The right wing says, we're not near. We lost our way when we started creating a national innovation system. We should be totally laissez-faire like we were in the 1800s. But if you go around the globe and you look at the countries who are actually outperforming the United States, here's the funny thing. They're further down the national innovation system direction of things. They're not further left. They're not further right. Okay? They're neither further left nor further right. They are further down the path of the national innovation system that we used to have. In other words, the Vannevar Bush system. And guess what? Those countries are mostly smaller countries with higher performance and a higher per capita income than we have. And they've achieved it since the year 2000. What are some of those countries? South Korea, Israel, Switzerland, Ireland, believe it or not, is outperforming the United States in innovation per capita. Ireland is one of the world examples right now of the innovation system economy. The Asian tigers, of course, Japan is getting ready to surprise the whole world with a huge boom because they went all in on the future. And they kind of skipped the past 20 years because they've been moonshotting and putting all their money into massive technology projects that were ahead of their time by 30 years. And they did this knowingly because they wanted to spend the entire late 20th century preparing to leapfrog the West. And they knew that they had started at such a high position, they couldn't just run an authority system or run a market system to outperform the United States. In the short run, there was no way there. They couldn't get there. But what they could do is do long-term planning to leapfrog us over a 30 to 50-year period. And in fact, that's exactly what they did. And you're going to see about 10 years from now, the Japanese are at the top of every game. Service robotics, nanotechnology, biotechnology, organ printing. The Japanese created the first synthetic blood in the world that works. So the Japanese have basically took a 30 to 50-year leapfrog plan, and they did the same kind of projects that Vannevar Bush would have told them that they would have done. Very long time horizon, very low return in the short run, very high return in the long term, and so potent that they would leapfrog the world's leaders in multiple industries. And this is what the Japanese have done. So here we are today, talking about doing the absolute worst thing possible, which is none of the above. We're neither moving far to the right to create a laissez-faire economy with moral hazard processes, nor are we moving far to the authoritarian left to create a Chinese dictatorial system that wouldn't work here anyway. Nor are we deepening our national innovation system, which is what all of the world's top performers are doing and have done since the year 2000, that are catching up with and even surpassing the United States in innovation. They're using the US system against us. What are we doing? We're doing what Michael Porter would call being stuck in the middle. Michael Porter is the leader in business strategy, number one most cited business scholar, and he invented the theory of generic business strategies. And he said, you can either be a cost leader, or you can focus on quality and be a differentiator. Or you could be a niche in cost or quality or some specialized thing. But the one thing you don't want to be is caught in the middle, which is a general gray mishmash of a little bit of everything, but no coordinated or clear national strategy or firm strategy. He also said the same thing applies to nation states. Well, unfortunately, the United States is going into the stuck in the middle situation. And what that means is that we are going to be we're going from the best possible strategy, which is the national innovation strategy. It's the differentiator strategy. It's the leading by differentiation in technology strategy. We're going from that leader differentiator position to stuck in the middle. China is the cost leader from the Porter perspective. They are driving cost leadership. That's their game. We were driving differentiation. Guess what? Now we don't know who we are because we're trying to do both to the same degree with middling success at both. We're not moving farther left in the world system sense. We're not moving farther right in the world system sense. We've been kind of stuck in the middle. And we're doing a very poor job of managing the radical centrist position. The radical centrist position is to dominate technology and a coordinated national system with a very flexible system. Well, that's what we have. We haven't lost it yet. We still got it. We still have Silicon Valley. We still have the leading automobile industry in the world. We still have in the Detroit cluster. We have the New York City financial cluster, which is the leading financial cluster in the world still. We have Hollywood, the leading entertainment cluster. We have the Pacific Northwest, which is the leading high-tech manufacturing cluster, Boeing and so forth, and shipbuilding and so forth. And then we also have the leading oil cluster. On top of that, we have Disney. We have Amazon. The list goes on. We've got incredible resources, both natural, technological, organizational, and human capital. Incredible resources that would make anyone else jealous. The question is, are we managing those resources well, Or are we actually causing ourselves harm in the way that we manage them? The argument that I'm making here is that we were not mismanaging until recently. And the point that we started mismanaging was when we started to believe that there was a left versus right, uh, where both the left and the right thought that we were at a suboptimal position and would improve if we would go either those two directions. But they were both wrong. They were both terribly wrong. A move to either one of those directions was actually inferior. And so what we had was a series of left-wing policy incursions that were subpar, moving us towards a policy position that we couldn't sustain. And then right-wing incursions, moving us towards a policy position that we couldn't sustain. So we have a general sort of mishmash of a little bit of left and a little bit of right, and a little bit of muddy gray in the middle, with no clear coordinated national strategy. So we are in decline because of the two-party system and their weird obsessions with trying to make the world a worse place. Both sides want to take us to a suboptimal place. The right wing wants to take us to a strategy that only worked in the 1800s. The far right, and the far left wants to take us to a strategy that only works if you're Russia and you're trying to mobilize from nothing to the top. But neither one of those two strategies actually works to lead a national innovation system from the top of the pile, from being a number one innovator. And so even though we had the best strategy, we're losing it. So what I'm arguing here is that we need to reclaim our strategy, our national innovation strategy that puts us at the top. And the way that we do that is by ignoring the left and the right, because they're both very wrong. Neither one of them knows how to produce a national innovation strategy. So I'm going to give you, in the last couple minutes of this video, a quick explanation of what that is. How do you do it? The wrong way to do it would be fascism. And so right now there's an alt-right movement growing because there's this weird fetish with the idea that we're going to create a new national socialist system. This is going on in Europe, by the way. All these right-wing, third-way movements. These are not traditional laissez-faire right in the United States perspective. This is not that kind of right wing. It's actually the merger of the right and the left wing, a socialist, national, authoritarian policy, which is very warlike and xenophobic and so forth. But socialism for us, capitalism for everybody else. That's how that works. And so that's not the right way to go, because you have to have extremely high homogeneity of culture to even make that plausible. You can't make a white national movement out of this country. That ship has sailed. The percentage of non-whites in this country is so high, and the percentage of those people in positions of power is so high that that's absolutely absurd. I'm sorry. There's even if you wanted to create that kind of racist system, it wouldn't work. So you need something other than race on which to define the national character, and nobody can really agree on what that is. So you can't have a national character that unites the entire country if you don't have a common race or common ethnicity, and you're even moving away from language commonality in this country. So that's not going to work. There are countries where you can do that. You can do that in Italy. That's what they're doing in Italy because they have that strong national Italian identity. Okay, that's where fascist movements happen. Italy has kind of always been fascist. It invented the concept 2,000 years ago, and it's been still operating under that on and off. Anyway, so what do we do here? What is our national identity, and how do you prevent it from being racist? And how do you reclaim our national innovation system? Well, the simple answer is that you need to move towards the center as aggressively as possible and define a center that everybody can agree on, rather than trying to cut half of the country off and say, those are my enemy. look, when you have a constant civil war inside of a country, you're not a united country. You don't have an identity. So what you have to do is end that civil war around some sort of common identity. And in this country, it will not be an authoritarian identity because the only thing that is true consistently about Americans is that they demand a much higher sense of personal liberties and individuality. They are much, much more sensitive to incursions on their freedoms, their liberties. So that's that's a very strong part of the national character. So you can't really have a truly authoritarian system. I'm going to tell you what our national character actually is: innovation, entrepreneurship, education, adaptation, change. We are the best country in the world at maintaining a constant state of change. And both the left and the right are trying to ruin that. The Bernie Sanders left basically wants to dial us back to a 1940s manufacturing type of working class, unionized, homogenized, it doesn't work. That ship has sailed. That's not our national identity. That's not who we are. Okay? We are not in the 1940s. We are not a manufacturing-based society. We are a service-based society. Okay? So almost all of Bernie Sanders' policies are based on manufacturing economies, and we're not one of them. So his policies come from the early 1900s socialism movement in the United States. People like Eugene Debs. Okay, those people were creating policies for 100 years ago. Bernie Sanders didn't get the memo that those policies are not appropriate anymore. Eugene Debs would not have created the same policies today as 100 years ago. So you have to be a special kind of stupid to even think that Eugene Debs would support the same policies today. Right? Not going to happen. We do not need a manufacturing factory world market socialism. It's not ideal. Okay. On the other hand, the right wing wants us to continually backpedal into the 20th century. They want to still live. They're still chasing the 1950s. But they don't understand that the 1950s was not created by conservatism. It was created by Vannevar Bush and the National Innovation System, Bell Labs, okay, and that kind of thing. And Bell Labs is not a conservative type of organization. It is the kind of organization that's looking for change, for completely new ideas, revolutionary ideas, ideas that never look backward and always look forward. That was Bell Labs. Not some sort of, we all show up and we work hard and we all wear good clean-cut clothing and we follow the rules and we all have the right attitude. That's not how the 1950s happened. That was the Norman Rockwell paintings. But those people were the beneficiaries of the innovators. So what I'm arguing is this. What we need to do is do a 21st century version of the Vannevar Bush economy. And that's going to be somewhat decentralized, but intensified in coordination. In other words, you must simultaneously decentralize while also coordinating. Some people think that decentralization means greater competition. And some people believe that the only way you can increase coordination is to centralize and to create a federalized authoritarian system that is homogenous across all 50 states. Wrong. The better way to create a healthy economy for the 21st century is to put money into the 50 states and the cities, not the federal level. The reason why is that the federal level should be mostly concerned with policy, not budgets. They should be concerned with coming up with the ideas that would help to coordinate the various different levels. That doesn't mean they should be managing the money. The money should be channeled through the lowest level of organization possible for each kind of activity, so that these local budget decisions could be made with some sort of friendly competition, friendly experimentation, so that each one of the 50 states can do things slightly differently, but hoping that the best practices emerge in a very friendly competition. Very much like a lot of these companies like Google and Virgin does inside their corporation. We call it co-opetition. And so what we need to recreate the 21st century innovation economy is to increase the budgets on innovation and not increase the budgets on stagnation. Stagnation is when you prop up some older system and say, well, if we could just dial the clock back and protect that system from the problems, everything will get better. No, it won't. It will get worse. It was brittle. It was destined to fail. Innovation renews us. So what we should be doing with COVID-19 in our response is we should be looking at ways that we can restore the economy with a forward-looking perspective. We should not be looking for ways to protect the old system. So the right wing is correct that we should not be bailing out things that don't work. And the left wing is correct that we should be minimizing the destruction from the system because we need to move forward. Well, the way that you do that, the way that you deal with the moral hazard, and the way that you deal with the bailout without having any problem is that you put your money into new. You put your money into small businesses. You put your money into new infrastructure projects, not bailing out the old ones. You put your money into new business proposals, not bailing out the old ones. You put your money into new products and innovation systems, not bailing out the old ones. So are we better off with the $2 trillion bailout plan or a $2 trillion national innovation plan? Could you even imagine what we could accomplish if we put that $2 trillion into our highest rate of return investments? When I say rate of return, I don't mean for the wealthy. I mean the social rate of return. The overall social benefit for me, for you, for everybody. We get more of a rate of return from building a new LED light bulb than we do from a program that teaches people how to turn their lights off. The left wing would rather spend that money on a program that teaches people how to turn the lights off or forces them to turn the light off. It doesn't even give them a choice. The right wing says, let it all work out. Let everything contract and let everybody be a miser, and everybody who doesn't, they'll just screw up on their own. The National Innovation System says, let's build a better light bulb, and you're both obsolete. So I hope I've done a pretty good illustration about what's wrong with our economic analysis of our system, and also how we have a virus situation that is being managed inappropriately from both directions, because they're both only going so far to promote the most innovative solutions to these problems. And even if you're going to distribute money to everybody, which I think is a good idea, it should be in an innovative way. As my friend Jim Rutt said, this is a perfect opportunity to innovate a new funding system where everybody gets a national funding card. And whenever we have emergency problems, it can immediately be deposited in your account and used, and that money could be switched off like a spigot whenever the period of it expires or so forth. And we can make real-time adjustments to your personal account. Wouldn't that be nice? A more innovative welfare system would be much more efficient, and it would create new innovation opportunities that we haven't even imagined yet. But no, the left basically says, how can we dumb this down? How can we make this as backward thinking as possible? Let's give everybody all the worker rights we wanted to give them 50 years ago at a very high price. Let's dumb down the tax code and actually at the same time adding regulations that make things even more difficult for the powers that be. But we're not going to innovate a solution. We're just going to make things more difficult. That's not innovative. That's obstructive. And the right wing's doing pretty much the same thing. They don't want to put any money in innovation at all. They say, oh, that's the free market. And then um, they want everybody to just they want to deal with the social consequences of poverty, crime going up from unemployment and so forth. Um, and their social Darwinism will actually reduce the overall performance of the economy and make it a longer recovery. And the middle path, the gray stuck in the middle, is the Keynesian solution. Let's do a hodgepodge of a little bit of all of this, but with no coordinated strategy, so that we just keep kicking the can down the road until maybe one day the United States finds a strategy again. So, long story short, too late. Um, we're stuck in the middle. The Keynesian solution is still stuck in the middle. Moving far left or far right would actually be an inferior choice. And we don't want to go fascist either. Fascism works for fascist countries, but it hurts the whole rest of the world. And fascism creates enemies, which eventually kills the fascist system anyway. So it's a very short run payoff. So you don't want to go that direction, because 20 years later, everyone kicks your butt because you're the most hated people on the planet. Look at Iran. How's that working out for them? And yes, that is a theocratic fascist society. Or look at North Korea. That's a communist branded fascist society, but it's fascist. Um, it doesn't work. Okay. So your only remaining option is to move towards the decentralization um, position, but to intensify our funding of change. And that is what I call the radical centrist position, or you could also call it the moderate south wing, left wing, right wing. The authoritarian wing is the north wing of fascism, and then as you go to the south wing, you're going towards a more libertarian or anarchist system. But if you're only going moderately that far, it's a decentralized system, confederated. So that means we need to pump more money into more localized activities, run more experiments, fail fast, fail cheap, as entrepreneurs like to say, and increase the innovation engine for the future, stimulate jobs, and do that all in the middle of the crisis. Rather than going, oh, we're panicking. There is no better time in world history to innovate than in the middle of a soft crisis like a virus. Because the world system is still functioning, the economy is still functioning, we have powerful businesses, we have lots of resources, we have a strong workforce, the fundamentals are all good. So what this crisis opportunity will give us is a beautiful national innovation strategy moment where we can hit that reset button and move forward. I hope this discussion was useful for some people and they will be able to hang with it. And I'm going to look at ways to make it shorter, and I'm going to do variations of this theme when I'm appearing on podcasts later in the year. So thanks for listening, and talk to you